On June 12, 2016, the world changed when Pulse nightclub in Orlando became the scene of the nation's worst mass shooting in modern American history. Club owner Barbara Poma was, along with the rest of the world, rocked into a new and unimaginable reality that carried immeasurable loss and hardship. This next story is her story, a story of a person that didn't ask for this position or title, and what she's doing now to preserve the memory and tell the stories of those who lost their lives, the survivors, and their loved ones. I'm honored to introduce Barbara Poma, CEO and Executive Director of the onePULSE Foundation and owner of Pulse Nightclub.
Good morning. Being amongst this talented group of people who create and bring life to the unimaginable and who are the most skilled in storytellers, it's a little intimidating. But at the same time, it's a bit comforting because you understand that everyone has a story to tell. This is my story, and I'm guessing it's a little out of the norm, but in any case, it is mine. And I'm proof that no matter where you think your life is going, that it can change in a second. It all began here. I grew up in a very stereotypical Italian Catholic household where you would not expect a leader to emerge. I was supposed to just grow up and get married and have babies. But instead, I was lucky enough to have a gay brother. And he broke us right out of any kind of traditional experiences that we thought we might ever have growing up. And thanks to his coming out and my mother's open arms, our family became some fierce voices for the LGBT community. But this transition did not happen overnight. There's a short list of things that I remember about my brother's life. I remember John asking to bring his first boyfriend home, and the answer being no. I remember trips to the priests and to the therapists to try and cure him. I remember John running away in the middle of the night to find some place he might fit in. I remember my mother showing up to the gay bars and demanding entrance because her son was underage than inside. But mostly what I remember is her talking about where these bars were and what they looked like. They were on the wrong side of the tracks. They were dark and they were seedy. Once the dust settled in my family, John continued to be John. He was a wonderful son. He was a fabulous brother. He was full of fun, sarcasm. He had great taste. He was very funny. But most importantly, he became the center of our family. It wasn't until he was gone that the stories began to be told. And that's when each of us realized that he truly had a special relationship with each one of us. My brother spent some individual time with me after his diagnosis with HIV. He took me on a one-day cruise. And on that one-day cruise, his goal was that he would tell me all of his life secrets and that I would tell him all of mine. So I thought this was a wonderful brother-sister moment, and so I did. I told him all the things I probably shouldn't have. And sure enough, in typical John fashion, when he was laying there maybe 24 hours before he passed, he turns to my mom right in front of me and says, "There's things about Barbara you should know." And so he told her, while I stood there in horror of all these stories that my mother should never have known. Until his last breath, he kept getting me in trouble. Beyond all the very, very funny stories I can tell you, there was one thing that he said to me before he died that resonated with me my entire life. He said to me, "Don't judge people. Get to know them. You'll miss out on some really interesting stories if you don't." And it stuck with me, mostly because John was usually funny and this was extraordinarily serious for him. But it came from a place that he understood too well. Everyone wanted to be accepted for exactly who they were and who they were born to be. This was the moment that I learned that I was meant to be an ally and I was meant to be his voice. I was only about 22 years old, but I already knew I accepted my brother. I mean, Lord, I had been growing up in his culture since I was 14, which is obviously too young, but that's how it went. That's my story. By February of 13 of 1991, John had passed from the complications of HIV/AIDS. And the hole that he left in my heart has never been filled. He was my balance. He was my opposite. He challenged me to do things I would never, ever have done. After he died, I volunteered with different nonprofits. One was Centaur, which I delivered food to people with HIV who were immobile and would not leave their house. When they closed their doors, I started working with children who were born with HIV and used to go hold babies and talk to families. Many years later, I married my husband, who happens to be a Sicilian, not Italian, they're different, a Sicilian man who owned restaurants. And so I left teaching and went to work with my husband. But when we met and we were dating, he said to me, don't ever tell my family that you had a gay brother who died of AIDS. And it was a really big hole. It punched right in my heart. And I said, I don't know if I could do that. First of all, we're going to be married. We're going to live forever. And so he was really adamant about that. And then he met someone at our restaurant that he opened in Thornton Park. And so he opened a restaurant called Wild Sides. If you're from here, you may know it. But he didn't realize that at that time, Thornton Park was kind of a gay district. So within a week of him opening the restaurant, some guy comes up, puts his arm around my husband and says, hey, thanks for being so friendly and opening up in this gay neighborhood. My husband's like, oh my God, I opened a restaurant in a gay neighborhood? And he didn't know it. I smiled. I laughed a lot. But that changed his life, and it changed actually the culture in all of our other businesses. And it actually led to the opening of Pulse. When we concepted Pulse, it was done so with real intention. Its name, the look, its purpose. The club's mission was to be a very beautiful, clean space for the LGBTQ+ community, for Orlando. After years of gay bars being those hole-in-the-walls and seedy places, I wanted to build something that every gay man and woman would be proud to bring their mother. And they did. We wanted everyone to feel comfortable as soon as they walked in the front door. And they did. We once actually voted the best place to bring your straight friends. We chose the name through a brainstorming session. We just wanted to find something that would capture the purpose of what we wanted and what we wanted to create for Orlando. We wanted to relate to music, we wanted to relate to our city, and I wanted to relate to John. The word pulse resonated. It became the heartbeat of Orlando, and it represented John's heartbeat. That iconic P you see, which is the very first logo we ever created, that was created on a napkin over a wine brainstorming session. So that's where we began. Pulse reconnected me to a life that I had loved and I had missed. I was a mom of 3 young children at the time when Pulse opened, so I wasn't really there at night. I was there for special occasions, for gay days, New Year's, but most importantly for me, what Pulse gave me was a platform to teach about HIV, to bring awareness to the club. We held so many fundraisers there. All of our servers and bartenders were trained to talk to people about being tested. For me, it became a platform for something that I was very, very passionate about. It wasn't until June 12th that I had learned everything I had set out to do, to create, had been accomplished. I felt such pride during the darkest moments, and I loved hearing every story and reading every message. Pulse was the place to bring your mom. 2 of them died there that evening, 1 dancing with her gay son. It was a place that straight people were comfortable. At least 6 of our victims were straight that evening. Our victims and survivors were gay, straight, black, white, Latin, brothers, sisters, mothers, and fathers. Since the tragedy, people have often asked me, how are you? How are you doing? I say, better. I'm doing better. The truth is, I am better. I'm better than I was that morning. I'm better than I was 6 months out or a year out. And I know that's what everyone wants to hear me say. And then I hear these words that they use for me, perseverance and strength, and sometimes you call me crazy. But they come to me and they say, thanks. Thank you for what you're doing. And I never really know how to answer these questions or respond to people, because in truth, all I'm really doing is what I think was right. Growing up, my mother said to me, sink or swim, Barb, sink or swim. I'm a swimmer. I swim. As the property owner of Pulse, my pain was entirely different than those who lost their partners, their friends, or their children. No matter where I looked, I didn't fit in. No one else sat in my shoes. I was it. I was 100% alone. And somehow I was looked to by so many for answers, to be this listening ear and for help. But my grief was unimaginable. It was like a weight sitting on my shoulders, and I lived in a very perpetual state of shock for at least a year, maybe a year and a half. I didn't know what day it was. I didn't know what time it was. I didn't know where I was. I could barely speak in full sentences, and I didn't sleep. I still don't really sleep all that much. I jumped at every loud sound. I constantly felt like things were crawling on my skin, even though I know there wasn't. I had become an absent parent in a second. I didn't even consider what my children were going through. I was inundated by media and lawyers and mail and calls and messages. I call it my year of living in this fog. Even 2 years later, I have trouble sleeping. I also lost a business, an income, a future investment, but no one thought of that. It's never happened before. No one in this room can really imagine what you would do if you were me, a small business owner, when that call came in. And I don't say that in any way that you just don't know what to do. I didn't know what to do. You can't imagine it. What do you do when your private business becomes an FBI terrorism case? How can you imagine what you would do when you turn on the TV to find a picture of your business on every national news outlet, that your staff and your community had just become victims of a terrorist attack? Imagine learning that 49 innocent people lay dying inside what you considered your second home. Hundreds were scarred for life, physically and emotionally, and all of that happened inside my beautiful four walls. All of a sudden, the life my husband and I had created and built, and the plans we had for our future were gone, and what I was given in return was an extraordinarily painful new journey. One of the most asked questions I get, and I continue to get, is why would I keep my property? Why did I want to take on this project? I could have walked away. But I made these decisions based on my core feelings and some advice that someone had given me. And that advice was, when you are faced with something that you don't know what to do, something really, really large in your life, take out the people, take out the money, and see what's left, and you'll find your direction. After I got that advice in, I think, the very first week of December, I remember driving over to Pulse. I sat outside of the chain link fence and I just cried and I just kept staring at the building, and I said, I'm meant to do this. I've got to do this. I didn't realize how this decision would affect my family and my children. I mean, one day my son, who is now 16, told me his biggest fear, that every time I left the house to go to the site or go to a march or to an appearance someplace public, that I was going to be killed. I had no idea that I was a target, that being a leader could be dangerous. I didn't even set out to be this leader. All I was continuing to do was the work that I really had always believed in. But everyone in this room has their own Pulse story. You all know where you were the moment you heard the news, whether you had a text or a phone call, where you turned on your TV. It instantly became part of Orlando's history, the world's history. It's become part of our legacy and our social responsibility to preserve it and tell its story. Not just the story of the night, but the story of the response afterwards. Pulse is different. It affected a global community, and I see it everywhere I travel. Since the tragedy, Pulse site became its own organic memorial. Orlando responded. Our nation responded. Thousands of people visited, leaving flowers and candles and artifacts and messages of hope and solidarity and heartbreak and anger. And our world responded. What's most important for us to understand about the response to the tragedy is not only the left items or the messages sent or the rainbow-lit buildings. This is a tragedy that started conversations. It's changed hearts and most inspiring places. There's a story of when I was building Pulse was under construction. And so there was a little church down the street that had gotten wind that a gay bar was opening in their neighborhood. And this little church was not happy about that. And so they went down to City Hall and complained and complained and complained. And one day we showed up to the construction site, there's a big red tag on it. Shut us down. We had to go fight the fight and get a variance, and eventually obviously got opened. But soon after the tragedy, every day I showed up at the site, I would see this large white catering cooler at the very end by the Pulse sign. And every day it was filled with fresh ice, fresh water, and Gatorades. And I was like, I couldn't believe who was doing this. You know, it was June, it was hot here, and someone wanted to serve the people who were visiting the site. Weeks went by, and finally I saw a car pulled up next to it, and I ran up and I said, I have to find out who's doing this. So I asked, I said, you know, who are you? Where are you from? And he says, well, I'm from the church down the street. You see that what happened at Pulse changed people. It even changed a church. It has changed many churches since. We talk about Pastor Joe Hunter from our community, who has a change of heart. Parents are accepting their children. We've talked about gun violence. We could talk about cultures. There have been so many tragedies since Pulse, but none have brought around the conversations that Pulse has the opportunity to tell. Let's fast forward a little bit into where I am today, and my fog has cleared mostly for the most part, and I continue to wake up every day and put one foot in front of the other. But now I was tasked with, what do I do next? So now what do I do? Where do I begin? I began with a task force, and I did that because I learned, okay, I'm going to build a memorial. I don't know how to do that. I was running a nightclub and restaurants and being a mom, and now I'm going to make a national memorial out of this location. So I just picked up the phone and called Oklahoma City, and I said, hi, my name is Barbara Poma. I'm the owner of the Pulse nightclub. Can you help me? And they said, absolutely. So they did. They said, the first thing you do is create a task force, Barb, and so I did. On that task force, you'll find family members and survivors and leaders from our community. The first thing that task force did was create this survey, and the survey was interesting. It was modeled after 9/11s and after Oklahoma Cities. But the reason I'm showing you this slide is because this slide shows the 6 words that Orlando happened to choose to represent us, and what you wanted to feel and what you would want to do when you came to our site. We talk about our community. We talk about how memorials have places where they honor their survivors and they honor their first responders and their victims. Well, with Pulse, we did not lose our building. Our building is still intact. It didn't come down. It wasn't get bombed. And so what do we do with that? And I said, well, how are we going to honor our survivors? I said, you know, if it wasn't for Orlando Health being 0.6 of a mile away from our nightclub, so many more victims would have lost their lives that night. So for me, creating a survivor walkway would connect Pulse to Orlando Health, and that would be a place that we could be able to tell the story of our survivors. I had to build a board of trustees, which was an amazing feat, but as you will tell, there's a very national board. We have an amazing board who are constantly giving of their time, of their talents, constantly working towards making this project come to fruition. It was time to go to work. What was I going to do? So this board and this task force took trips and toured so many different memorials and museums around the country. We went to 9/11. I've been there twice. And mind you, when we went to visit these places, they were filled with tables of people who were willing to help us, whether it be in development or in executive leadership. It was just always a round table of saying, bring your questions, let us help you answer. What's interesting when you go to 9/11, and this is the reason why I showed you the 6 words, was because when 9/11 did their survey, their 6 words from their community were loss, sadness, solemn, grief. So when you go to 9/11, in their RFP, this was part of what they wanted to convey. That's how you feel when you go there and you look at those big waterfalls into the ground. There you feel that loss, the enormity of that loss. That's exactly what they wanted you to feel. Think of Orlando's 6 words. Oklahoma City's been an amazing partner. What amazes me about this, how they tell their story, it's been 20 years. There are still over 300,000 visitors who visited that site every year, still to this day. Their story is impactful. How they tell their story is amazing. And their community takes such pride in it. If you've ever thought of going to Shanksville, Pennsylvania, there would be no other reason than to go visit the Shanksville Memorial there. again, it was breathtaking. This happened in Shanksville, Pennsylvania, actually, about 237 people who live in this town. And so they had to receive 40 families from that plane. And what is amazing to me is how they tell the story at the site there was just extraordinarily impactful. And there's no reason to really go there except to visit this place. And they get over 300,000 visitors a year. The Pentagon Memorial was such an interesting thing because the Pentagon, I don't know if you remember when that tragedy hit, but the president had ordered that the Pentagon be rebuilt immediately using the same exact stone from the same exact quarry so the Pentagon would never look affected. And it was the families and survivors who went, oh no, that happened. And my family member died there, and there will be a memorial there for them. And it actually was family members who came together and created this memorial. Same process that we're all using. What was interesting here is that they built it, and they built it for themselves, thinking that no one ever was going to come visit it. They built it just for them. And so they told us their best practices and also the things that they would have done differently. And so there were so many things that they would have done differently had they realized that this meant something to so many other people. They've never even built a museum or any kind of education component. They have over 1 million visitors a year, and they're just now starting another campaign to actually build an education center for people who come to visit here. After visiting all of these places and seeing how many years it has been since their tragedies, they're still telling their stories, they're still educating our youth. And that to me was so inspiring to see what we have our job to do here in Orlando. The one place I went to go be on a panel, I was at Laramie, Wyoming, and I'm not sure how many people in this room will ever know about the Matthew Shepard story. Matthew Shepard was a young gay man who was going to school in Laramie, Wyoming 20 years ago and was beaten to death and tied to a fence post and left to die. So I went to Laramie to go speak to him, and his parents, Matthew and Judy Shepard, started the Matthew Shepard Foundation, and they fought for the first hate crime legislation to be passed on our federal government. So I went to Laramie, and the first thing I did when I landed there is I said, well, can you please take me to where Matthew was left to die? And the woman said to me, no, I can't take you there. And I said, why? Because you don't like to? You don't know how to get there? And she says, no, it's gone. I said, what do you mean it's gone? She said, the person who owned the property just got tired of people coming by, so he just took the fence post down, and now we don't really know where that exact spot might be. I said, wow, all right. I said, well, take me to the bar where he had his last beer, where he met his attackers. Can't do that either, because that's been erased too. I came home from Laramie and realizing the importance of the work that we're about to set out to do because of Matthew, that they erased him, they erased what happened there. And this was a murder that was very well known. I'm not sure if any of you had the chance to visit the site since, but it was really important for us to create what we call our interim memorial, because the site had remained in its original existence since the FBI handed it back over to me, which was with a chain link fence. And it was not a respectful place for our 49, or for our survivors, or the people who wanted to visit and learn about what happened there. The task force was instrumental in creating this design and getting it implemented along with our board. And it just goes to show how important the space is. We started off getting about 300 visitors a day already to our interim memorial. The first 6 weeks we were open there, we had some help from some docents from the Disney program, and they stayed on site for 6 weeks and talked to visitors who came to visit, and we got to listen to their stories, where they traveled from around the world, what they expected to see here. And those docents would come back every day to us and tell us these stories and be crying. And they did not expect the impact of what Pulse had to other people. That leads us to the museum and why it's important that we tell the story about our 49 people that were taken. We talk about the love, not the hate. We talk about telling their story in a way that is incredibly personal and important. It's also our place of education, and it talks about the impact on our city. We have to remember that it is our social responsibility at this point to become the story keepers for the generations to come when we are all long gone. But when I talked to the family members, they said, we want you to be able to tell the story of the victims differently, not just read their names out on June 12th, not just put a plaque up inside a museum and have a place to tell their story. How else can they live on forever? And so I thought, how else can I make them live on forever? And so we are working on a scholarship program for each of them. And what's very different about our scholarships and others is that not only are they specific to the name of the victim, but to that victim's actual aspiration or job, whether they had reached it or not. For example, if Amanda Alviar wanted to become a nurse, it would be the Amanda Alviar Scholarship for Nursing specifically. So that person who would receive her scholarship would know her story, hopefully meet her parents, and every 4 years we'd have a new Amanda Alviar nurse who's out there, ambassadors for generations to come, telling the story and letting her story live on forever. Another way that I think it's going to be very important to continue to talk about Pulse and the impact it had on the world was we created these, what we call Amity programs. And I know that every business in here has a D&I group, and you have your ERGs, and everyone is learning to walk the walk and talk the talk. But Amity is different, and it's actually an educational program that the Disney Institute helped the foundation develop, and I actually just did my first launch of it out in Seattle 2 days ago at the Out and Equal convention. And so we talk about what it is to create Amity in our world, to change, to erase hate, to prevent it from happening again, what you can do every day to live differently. How do we do this? It's not hard. You can connect peoples and businesses and groups together. We can talk about how to tell the story in our museum experience. And I think that it's important to talk about that it actually is happening already. There are people who are changing hate rhetoric, people who are living hateful lives. And a very, very short story is, I don't know how many of you have ever heard of Westboro Baptist Church? Have you ever seen signs? People hold these signs. They actually showed up here in Orlando at our funerals to protest the funerals. It's a very hateful rhetoric, but there's a woman, her name is Megan Phelps Roper, and she was actually the granddaughter of the man who founded the church. She was raised in the church. She was actually one of those little girls holding the signs and picketing all kinds of places. As an adult in the church, her job became to use Twitter to attack people. So she one time had just chose this Jewish blogger, and so she sent him a hateful message, and he thought to himself, do I engage with her? How do I engage with her? If I do so, her people are going to see the message and so will mine. And he used this opportunity over years' time to have this incredibly educational conversation with her, an impactful conversation. So much that someone else had also started having a conversation with her like that too. And within 1 year, she woke up one day and said, you know what, I think everything I've been taught is wrong. And she packed up, and she left her family, and she left her church. And now she's out telling her story about how she was changed and how her heart was changed. I've shared a lot of stories with you today, and something else that's interesting is that people have been showing up to the site in groups and in droves. We had a Jewish youth program, BBYO, had a convention here in Orlando. They wanted to have an out session. Their students came and showed up and sang a prayer at the site. Alex Partners, which is a financial group, had their convention in Orlando, called me and said, we'd like to bring a group. And I said, okay, we can bring a group. He said, I'm going to ask around. It might be about 50 people. Can you handle that? And I said, sure, we can handle that. He called back within a few months and said, I've got 9 tour buses coming. I was like, okay, we can handle that. We also, the YMCA called, and this story just amazes me because the YMCA is a large Christian group. They finally have their first women's leadership convention ever, and they have it here in Orlando. And the Christian group called us because they wanted to start their convention off at a place they thought would be meaningful and impactful. These women who had no idea, were not really connected to the LGBT community, so they thought, but were so moved that they wound up staying on the site an extra half an hour long after I had to leave. I know I have shared a lot of stories with you today, shared my story with you, the story of our 49 and what we're going to do in the next couple of years to preserve their stories for the generations to come. I hope I made an impact on you. It's a hard story to tell, and I'm grateful that I had a chance to share it with you today. I want you to also know that it calls for you to become engaged with a mission that becomes your legacy, whatever your passion is. This is our generation's legacy, and it's not going to happen overnight, but I ask you to find it in your heart, to plant a seed, to start some difficult conversations, and help us. Thank you.